DC's most notorious drug kingpin, Rayful wasn't just another hustler. He was the guy who flipped Washington, D.C.'s whole criminal scene upside down in the 1980s. By the time he was just 22, Rayful controlled a jaw-dropping 60% of the city's drug trade. His organization ran like a Fortune 500 company with a criminal twist. He had about 150 people working under him, all dedicated to moving between 1,000 and 2,000 kilos of Colombian cocaine a week, straight out of LA. At its peak, his empire was pulling in around $300 million a year. Some weeks, the operation alone cleared $2 million. For a city like DC, that was unimaginable money at the time.
When crack was the hustle here in the nation's capital back in the 1980s, nobody, absolutely nobody, worked harder than Rayful Edmond III.
Rayful Edmond III, the biggest drug dealer in the history of Washington, D.C., sold some $300 million a year worth of cocaine and crack.
His headquarters was The Strip, a 2-block stretch on Morton Place and Orleans Place, NE. This wasn't just a corner operation, it was a fortified setup. Lookouts with walkie-talkies shouted, "Aller Ray, Aller Ray," whenever cops rolled through, and alleys were rigged with tripwires and debris to slow down any raids. On the surface, Rayful liked to think of himself as a breadwinner, even describing himself as a loving, caring person who provided for his community. But behind all that shine, the truth was darker. His empire ran on blood. Under his reign, homicides in the district doubled, and cocaine-related emergencies in hospitals spiked 400%. His crew was tied to more than 30 murders, a reign of terror meant to protect territory and power.
Police say the Edmond organization enforced its will with violence. As many as 30 murders.
Rayful's trial in December 1989 showed just how much fear he commanded. For the first time in DC history, a completely anonymous jury was brought in. Jurors sat behind bulletproof glass. And it wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Days before he was supposed to testify, a 17-year-old witness named Donald P. Winley, a part-time gopher for Rayful, was gunned down in a drive-by. Another witness's home was firebombed. Even Rayful himself wasn't trusted in a regular jail. They kept him at Quantico Marine Base and flew him into court daily by helicopter, like he was some mob boss out of a movie.
Jurors are under 24-hour guard. Their names are kept secret. The whole trial is conducted behind bulletproof glass. In fact, the house of the family of one witness was firebombed after her testimony. Another key witness has refused to testify.
In 1989, Rayful got hit with life plus 20 years for running a continuing criminal enterprise and for ordering murders. But prison didn't stop him. From Lewisburg Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, he kept the hustle alive. He connected with Colombian traffickers, directed drug deals back in DC, and even had drugs smuggled into the prison 50 to 60 times. He once bragged to officials that he had no problem conducting drug deals over prison phones because he knew most calls weren't being tapped. By 1994, though, the game caught up with him again. He flipped, turned informant, and admitted his crimes in exchange for his mother's release from prison. That deal added another 30 years to his sentence. Rayful Edmond III passed away in December 2024 at 60 years old, still in federal custody. They called him the Michael Jordan of the murder game. Perry wasn't just another trigger-happy street soldier. He was a legend in Washington for being willing to kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. Broad daylight, in front of cops, in crowded neighborhoods. It didn't matter. If Wayne Perry had your name on his list, your time was up.
This guy, Wayne Perry, was considered the Michael Jordan of the murder game.
Wayne Perry was one of our most prolific killers in D.C.
By the late 80s and early 90s, Perry had locked in as the chief enforcer for Alpo Martinez's operation after Alpo expanded from Harlem into D.C. Federal prosecutors tied him to 8 of the 9 murders that Alpo's crew committed between 1989 and 1991. The list of bodies included Michael Frey Salters, Evelyn Carter, and Garrett Gary Terrell. That last one showed just how cold Wayne could be. When Alpo suspected Terrell was plotting to rob the organization, Perry didn't hesitate. He him, and then killed him.
So he hit him in the head twice. down. Gary, he winds up himself from his muscles relaxing. Guy said, yo, take off his clothes, man, so they won't spot him through the clothes and all that. Take off his clothes and leave him naked in the woods.
Another one of the most infamous stories tied to Perry's name was the execution of a New York rival, Domenico Benson. It went down in broad daylight, right after a public basketball game. Alpo invited Benson over like they were about to squash their beef. He shook his hand, gave Perry's man a simple nod, and in that instant, Benson was shot in the head. Another story that shows just how cold-blooded Perry could be was when one of his hitters messed up during the murder of Evelyn Carter. They got the job done, but the shooter failed to hit her in the head. That mistake infuriated Perry. To him, there was only one way to kill someone, and it had to be done properly. So, right there in public, he walked up to a random man using a payphone, pulled the trigger, and dropped him with a headshot. Afterward, Perry turned to his crew and coldly said, "That's how you kill somebody." The whole organization came crashing down in 1991 when Alpo Martinez was arrested. Facing the death penalty himself for 14 murders, Alpo flipped. He became a federal informant and started spilling everything. The worst of his testimony was reserved for his own right-hand man, Wayne Perry. Alpo painted him as the enforcer, the man who handled the dirty work, the one behind multiple cold-blooded murders. Then in 1993, prosecutors came down on Perry with an indictment stacked with 27 counts, including his role in 8 out of 9 murders tied to the organization. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole. Today, Wayne "Silk" Perry sits in the nation's most secure prison, ADX Florence, the federal supermax in Colorado, the same place that houses some of America's most infamous criminals. He converted to Islam and adopted the name Nkosi Shaka Zulu L. Timothy McGhee, better known as Huero, or the monster of Atwater Village, wasn't your average LA gang member. He was something far more terrifying, a psychopath who treated murder like a sport. By the late 90s, he had built a reputation so ruthless that even hardened criminals feared crossing his path. His violence started early. At 16, back in 1989, he blasted a shotgun into a crowd, leaving one man badly wounded. That stunt landed him in juvie. By 1993, he was back in trouble for assaulting a cop, but the mid to late 90s is when McGhee truly went on his killing spree. In 1997, he chased rival gang members Juan and Pedro through Atwater. He left Juan paralyzed from the waist down and nearly killed Pedro by unloading into a car he thought had bulletproof glass. That same year, he killed Ronnie, a Frogtown reefer, by forcing him to strip off his shirt to show tattoos, then riddling him with 28 bullets. And the stories only got darker. In 2000, McGhee allegedly shot and killed a 17-year-old high schooler named Marty Robles Jr., a kid who was just sketching by the LA River. He then executed a homeless man nearby just because he thought the guy had seen too much. After that, he reportedly turned to his homeboy and, without a shred of remorse, said he was hungry and wanted food. He ran Toonerville 13 like a military unit. Members had to do group exercises, run drills, and practice target shooting. Armed guards with radios patrolled entry points, calling in suspicious cars like soldiers in a war zone. He even used police scanners to ambush cops on the 4th of July, having his men throw junk into the street and then open fire on a pursuing patrol car. From 2000 into 2001, his violence spiraled. He ordered murders over petty beefs, killed a man named Carlos simply because he didn't recognize him, and even gunned down Sherry Wasowski, her mother, and their neighbor after Sherry had reported him for dealing drugs. To cover his tracks, he killed his own friend Christina Duran, 5 bullets to the head on her birthday, just 2 days after she'd spoken to police. His rap lyrics bragged about erasing witnesses, and prosecutors later used them in court to show just how openly he embraced his violence.
Of killing 2 gang rivals and a woman. One of the victims was shot 28 times. McGhee also opened fire on police officers during an ambush. Prosecutors say he even boasted in rap lyrics about the pleasure he got from killing.
The LAPD finally pulled together a special task force in 2002. linking him to at least a dozen killings. He landed on America's Most Wanted before being caught in Arizona in 2003. Even behind bars, McGhee didn't calm down. In LA County Jail, he commanded riots where inmates pelted deputies with fruit, urine, and bleach. In 2007, he was sentenced to death for 3 murders and 4 attempted murders. Reportedly, he grinned as prosecutors described the carnage.
You are sentenced to death.
35-year-old Timothy McGhee seemed smiling and laughing during the sentencing hearing.
Today, McGhee sits on death row at San Quentin, a man who seemed to find joy in death. They called him Big Evil. Cleamon Johnson's life started innocently enough, Boy Scout, loving parents, the whole setup, but South Central Los Angeles was unforgiving. By 8 years old, his world was shattered. He watched his friend Darryl get riddled with bullets, more than 10 shots at 84th and Town. A year later, he saw another boy murdered right in front of him. Those moments hardened him. By 13, he was already infamous, smashing a bully's face into a basketball pole until it was covered in blood. Johnson joined the '89 family Swan Bloods and didn't stop there. He pulled together the gang's most vicious members into a crew he named the 88 Monsters. From there, his reputation exploded. Detective Thomas Call once called him the most cold-blooded killer in the city of Los Angeles. His gang was notorious for lightning-fast retaliation. If one of theirs got touched, rivals knew bullets would be flying back almost immediately.
Big Evil.
Big Evil.
What did you do to earn it?
Can't say. Statute of time limitations haven't run out on that yet.
Big Evil's brutality wasn't random, it was calculated. In 1991, he set up 2 diversionary shootings just to pull cops away from Avalon Gardens. Then he and 10 men unleashed over 200 rounds into the projects, killing 1 person. Later that year, he ordered the murders of Donald, a new father and ex-Marine, and Peyton. Why? Because they lived on the wrong side of Central Avenue, the invisible line dividing Bloods and Crips. Johnson knew they weren't gang members, but he used their deaths as an initiation test for a new recruit. By the early 90s, his gang had turned the neighborhood into one of the deadliest square miles in California. In 1993 alone, that tiny patch of turf saw 32 murders. Detectives tied the '89 family Swans to more than 70 killings in the decade. And yet, Cleamon often walked free because no one dared testify. Witnesses who spoke up had a way of winding up dead. Gloria, who pointed out a Swan shooter, was murdered. Denise Jones, who testified in the same case, was also killed. On the streets, people whispered Johnson was untouchable.
In the 80s and 90s, Johnson was a notorious leader of the '89 Family Bloods gang. Police have linked him to 20 murders and called him the most cold-blooded killer in the city.
That illusion shattered in 1997 when Johnson and a co-defendant were convicted of the murders of Donald and Peyton. He was sentenced to death, but instead of being broken, he bragged that the death penalty saved his life since appeals would keep him alive for years. He even celebrated with homemade jailhouse brew. In 2011, the California Supreme Court overturned his conviction, but by then, his legend was cemented. Big Evil wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning. The self-proclaimed Mr. Untouchable didn't just operate in Harlem. He was Harlem's heroin trade in the 1970s. When people talked about the dope game uptown, they were talking about Nicky Barnes. His empire was a well-oiled machine called the Council. At its peak, the Council moved 50 to 100 pounds of pure heroin every single month, funneling millions into their pockets and keeping hundreds of people employed in their drug-fueled economy. Barnes wasn't just a dealer, he was an innovator in street governance. He knew Harlem was crawling with rivals, snitches, and undercover cops, and the only way to stay on top was to rule with fear. Murder was board-approved. Federal prosecutors later revealed that the council signed off on killings like it was regular business. 6 confirmed murders of suspected informants, dozens more tied to their reign. Barnes had a simple philosophy. If you even thought about cooperating with the feds, you were gone. It didn't matter if you were a childhood friend, a relative, or someone who once saved his life. And yet, Barnes couldn't resist his own ego. He called himself Mr. Untouchable, flaunted his power, and even let the New York Times put his face on the front page, smiling in a tailored suit. That arrogance painted a target on his back. When he finally got hit with a life sentence, Barnes flipped the same way he had punished others for flipping. Facing forever behind bars, Mr. Untouchable turned government informant, testifying against his own crew. The irony couldn't have been louder. The man who made snitching a death sentence ended up snitching himself to survive. He wasn't just a Harlem hustler. He became one of the most infamous names of the 1980s crack era, a legend so big that Hollywood built a character around him, Cameron's Rico in Paid in Full. Alpo started out young, just 14 years old, running nickel and dime hustles in East Harlem. But his ambition was skyscraper high, and it didn't take long before he leveled up into one of the biggest drug kingpins on the East Coast, with operations stretching from New York to Washington, D.C. Alpo wasn't just about money though, he was about blood. He confessed to 14 murders, and law enforcement compared him to Ted Bundy for how casually he could kill and keep it moving. The murder that still echoes the loudest was the 1990 hit on his own partner and friend, Rich Porter. Porter was Harlem royalty, respected in the streets, and Alpo had shared millions with him. But paranoia and greed outweighed loyalty. Alpo suspected Rich was holding back on drug profits, so he lured him in, shot him, and dumped his body like trash.
I was asking him like, yo, Rich, where did you get that coke from, man? That shit was good because I wanted to make him comfortable. He's like, I got it from my connect. So from there, I knew he was lying. I turned to my little man. I gave him the nod. Once I gave him the nod, my little man spent, because he was short so he could stand up in the van. Next thing you heard was the 2 gunshots, bang, bang.
To make it worse, Rich's little brother Donald had already been kidnapped, tortured, and killed around that same time, his finger sent in the mail as proof. Harlem was grieving, and Alpo was already plotting. It didn't stop there. He took down heavyweights in D.C. too, including Michael Frey Salters, Timothy Cohen, and Mark Mullen, often in brazen daylight hits. By 1991, the FBI was on him heavy, and after a manhunt, they caught him in D.C. Looking at either death row or life with no parole, Alpo did the same thing Barnes had done years earlier. He cut a deal. He became an informant and snitched on his enforcer, Wayne Silk Perry, among others. His cooperation got him 35 years instead of a needle, and he walked out in 2015 under witness protection. But Alpo couldn't stay out of Harlem. He returned often, almost daring fate, bragging about the past, even showing filmmakers where he killed Rich Porter. That arrogance caught up with him. On Halloween morning, October 31st, 2021, Alpo was shot 5 times while driving his Dodge Ram through Harlem. Reports said he was even tossing dope out of the window as he was bleeding out, trying not to get caught dirty in death. Officially, cops called it road rage, but for Harlem, it felt like karma. He is the half-brother of Cash Money Records bosses Birdman and Slim. And before rap money turned the Williams family into moguls, Terrance's name rang bells in the streets. He was tied to a crew called the Hot Boys, not the rap group, but the original violent street gang that inspired the name. They were knee-deep robberies and straight-up murder. Gangsta Williams had no shame about his record. In fact, he bragged about it. He admitted to being involved in up to 40 murders, claiming he personally pulled the trigger on at least 15.
In the state, you confessed to killing how many people?
40.
What? You confessed to killing 40 people in the state?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He claimed he and his crew didn't do drive-bys. They got close, made sure the target was the target, and handled business up front. He even said he didn't feel bad for the families of his victims, because in his eyes, a lot of those guys had killed too. But the feds caught him slipping in 1998 with an FBI wiretap that had him plotting the murder of New York drug dealers who had crossed him over a shipment. By 1999, Williams was down bad, pleading guilty to running a continuing criminal enterprise and solicitation for murder. He got life plus 20 years, basically a slow death behind bars. But while inside, he flipped the script. Williams started cooperating, giving up information on murders, even pushing witnesses to come forward. He admitted to witnessing killings, but often pointed the finger at dead co-defendants. At first, it didn't earn him any favors. Co-defendants later tied him directly to other murders, and prosecutors refused to cut his sentence. But in 2025, after more than 2 decades in prison, Williams shocked everyone by walking free. The judge sealed the reasons for his release, but Williams himself claimed it was because he helped close cold cases by putting names to murders, and most of the people he snitched on were already dead. Also known as the Preacher, or the Black Hand of Death. He was the kind of figure that made even other gangsters nervous. Heatley ran the Preacher Crew, a notorious Harlem and Bronx organization in the late 80s and early 90s that thrived off extortion, kidnappings, torture, and murder. Rumors swirled about a killing room at 2075 Grand Concourse in the Bronx, where victims were chained, beaten, and tortured before Preacher himself decided their fate with a thumbs up or thumbs down, like some gladiator in Rome. A thumb down meant death.
There's a building called 2075 Grand Concourse, and there's a basement there. Preacher lived there. The rumor was that he owned the building, and that's where they conducted most of their tortures, their murders.
What they would do is he would vote thumbs up or thumbs down like the Roman gladiator days, and he was the ruler. He would just go like this with the thumb, and that meant kill him.
His crew even had janitors, guys whose only job was to clean up the blood and bodies. The crimes pinned on them were monstrous: beheadings, assaults, mutilations.
Jack and my co-defendant Pop was playing soccer with this nigga head on the roof. They was kicking this shit around while I was wrapped up in the plastic bag. These niggas is bugged out.
There were whispers they kidnapped singer Bobby Brown once over a drug debt, and some believed they were behind the kidnapping and murder of Rich Porter's little brother Donald. Preacher enforced a twisted order inside his gang. No using drugs, no stealing from the crew, no infighting. Break those rules, and you could be beaten or killed. His right-hand man, John Cuff, a dirty ex-cop, carried out many of those punishments. By the mid-1990s, law enforcement linked nearly 45 murders to the Preacher Crew. Snitching was unthinkable. Everyone knew talking meant certain death. But the violence got so extreme that NYPD and the FBI formed a special task force, C-11, just to bring Heatley down. It took years of rumors and dead ends before one captured crew member finally broke and pointed agents to the killing room. Even then, Heatley tried to silence the snitch, sending Cuff and others to stalk him with masks, ropes, and pipes in a van outside court. That led to the massive 47-count RICO indictment in 1996. For the first time, Preacher was looking at the death penalty under the brand new drug kingpin law. Facing the needle, Preacher did what many of his peers had done. He cut a deal. In 1999, he pleaded guilty to racketeering and conspiracy tied to 13 murders, trading execution for life in prison. He showed no remorse in court, insisting he was innocent even as bodies stacked up in the evidence. Today, Clarence Heatley is serving life at FCY Talladega in Alabama. Known on the streets as Wicked, this guy ran his BL Street gang in Panorama City like a ruthless CEO, even while locked up. From inside prison, with nothing but a contraband cell phone, he had his hands wrapped tight around every move his crew made on the outside. His whole mission was to prove to the Mexican mafia, La M, that he was the real deal. To him, loyalty wasn't enough. You had to show it by blood. Anyone he thought was soft, a snitch, a user, or even just disloyal was erased. His story started ugly and early. Back in '95, just 18 years old, Romo got into it with a dude named Manuel Ayla outside Tommy's Hamburgers on Roscoe Boulevard. One punch landed on him, and Romo pulled out a gun and ended Ayla's life on the spot. That earned him 18 years behind bars. And when he finally got out in late 2014, instead of laying low, he picked up right where he left off. The bodies started piling quick. November 2015, his first big move was setting up Felipe Delgado, a drug dealer who thought Romo was good for a kilo on credit. Romo didn't feel like paying, so instead of cash, Delgado got bullets to the body behind an apartment complex. Then came Isidro Topo Alba, a veteran of the BL street set. Romo lured him to what looked like a drug deal, but it was really an ambush. Alba caught a storm of gunfire. His girlfriend barely survived, and when she tried to flag down the shooter's car, they spun back and tried to kill her too. And Romo didn't stop there. Carlos Rios, just 21, thought he was making his mark by tattooing a big B on his face for the gang. Problem was, Romo hadn't approved it. That tiny act of pride cost him his life, shot in the back while tagging a wall. All the while, Romo's right-hand man, Oscar Smokey Molina, kept him updated over WhatsApp with chilling texts like, "Worked out perfecto." But in Romo's world, loyalty had an expiration date. By 2018, he turned on Molina too, ordering him killed just because he missed some calls and maybe lied about some dope. Then came the most heartbreaking part of the whole saga, Karen Tobar. She wasn't even in the game, just a 23-year-old woman who happened to be in Molina's apartment when he was killed. Romo decided she was a liability, thought she might have spoken to the cops. 12 days later, his guys picked her up in a bandit cab, drove her to a park in Sylmar, and stabbed her to death. By 2023, Romo was finally nailed, life without parole for murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy. They shipped him to Sentinel State Prison, but the story didn't end there. On July 21st, 2024, the hunter became the hunted. 3 inmates, Christian Moreno, Johnny Garcia, and Christian Hernandez, rushed him and stabbed him over and over. Guards hit them with pepper spray again and again, but they wouldn't stop. Wicked bled out on that cold prison floor, dead by 9:52 p.m. Coming out of South Jamaica, Queens, he founded the Supreme Team in the early 80s and quickly turned it into one of the most feared and structured organizations in New York. By 1987, the Supreme Team was pulling in over $200,000 a day. But the real trademark of Supreme's reign wasn't just the money, it was the violence. Betray him, and that was your death sentence. 6 people at least were murdered under his watch, and he had 10 separate murder conspiracy charges linked to his name. He made execution a routine part of business, and that kind of fear kept everyone in line. His first big conviction came in 1989. Supreme got slapped with 150 to 200 years for the killing of a drug dealer named William Pookie Young. Most men would have disappeared into the prison system and never been heard from again. Not Supreme. Even locked up, his word still ran Queens. From behind bars, he kept orchestrating drug runs and business moves until feds finally stacked on more charges in the 90s. But when he got out in 1997, it was like he'd been sitting in prison plotting his next empire. He came back bigger, tapping into heroin and cocaine networks across multiple states. And with that expansion came more blood. In 2001, Supreme made one of his most notorious moves, paying Harlem hitmen to take out aspiring rapper Eric E. Moneybags Smith. They shot him 11 times point blank. And if that wasn't enough, they also killed Smith's associate, Troy Singleton, just to keep retaliation off the table. It took until 2007 for the law to finally box him in. Racketeering, double murder for hire, drug trafficking, you name it. Supreme was sentenced to life without parole. He built one of the most organized and feared street armies in the country. What started as the Gangster Disciples on Chicago's South Side became the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, stretching across multiple states with over 6,000 members and raking in around $100 million a year.
His name is Larry Hoover. He's the reputed leader of the Black Gangster Disciples street gang, one of the largest in the nation.
Hoover's first major strike came in 1973. A 19-year-old drug dealer named William Pookie Young had allegedly robbed one of Hoover's spots. Hoover didn't let it slide. He ordered Young's execution. The body was found in an alley, shot in the nose, the back of the head, and the arm. Hoover was convicted and given a jaw-dropping 150 to 200 years. but prison just turned him into a myth. From inside, Hoover still pulled the strings. Drug trafficking, extortion, murders, it all ran through him. By the 1990s, the feds had to get creative, planting bugs in visitor badges just to catch his orders. And what they uncovered was proof of something rare. A man running a nationwide criminal empire from a maximum security cell. In 1995, Hoover and his inner circle were indicted on federal charges. At trial, prosecutors painted him as a ruthless CEO of crime. On August 22, 1997, he was convicted of drug conspiracy, extortion, and continuing to engage in a criminal enterprise. Another life sentence stacked onto his original time. And this time, he was sent to ADX Florence, Colorado, the infamous Supermax prison, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. He was the kind of kingpin who wore his ambition on his sleeve. Leader of Oakland's 69 mob, he was flashy, charismatic, and unapologetically ruthless. He didn't shy away from his image. He once told his probation officer, "I like money, I like jewelry, and I like fine cars, and I went out and got them." Isn't that the American way? At its peak, his operation was a money machine. Up to 20,000 in drugs sold daily, stretching across Oakland, Berkeley, and Sacramento, adding up to $5 million a year. But the price of that success was blood. Rival crews like Mickey Moore's and the Funktown USA gang were locked in constant wars with him. And when the 69 mob fought, the whole city shook.
Oakland is in the midst of a violent battle over control of the drug trade. Police say that drugs have been responsible for 41 murders already this year.
The violence reached nightmare levels in the summer of 1980. 6 gangland murders in a matter of weeks. The most chilling was the triple homicide of Ricky the Rocket Walker, his brother Roger Red Walker, and their sister-in-law, Sandy Adamson. Strangled, shot, and dumped with plastic bags over their heads on a slope near Skyline Boulevard. Witnesses later testified that Felix's guys bragged about the murders like it was nothing. Felix wasn't just violent, he was smart. While his people handled murders, he made sure to travel to Los Angeles, setting up an alibi in advance. His ruthlessness gave the 69 mob a reputation so terrifying that even when cops cracked down, their grip on Oakland's heroin market didn't budge. He built one of Harlem's most notorious heroin empires during the late 1960s and early 1970s, openly admitting to orchestrating and executing numerous murders. Lucas rose to fame for his high-purity Blue Magic heroin, a brand name that rang out from the corners of Harlem all the way to the suburbs. What set him apart was the way he played the game. He didn't just buy product from the usual mafia middlemen. Frank flew overseas and built his own pipeline, pioneering a direct heroin smuggling route straight from Southeast Asia. He called it his direct connection from the jungle. By cutting out the middle, he guaranteed better quality and fatter profits. At his peak, Lucas claimed he was pulling in $1 million a day. He said he stashed $52 million in Cayman Islands banks, with another $300 million worth of heroin sitting on reserve like inventory in a warehouse. The operation was so massive, he had to spend around $200,000 every week just to keep cops on his payroll. But money like that came with blood. Lucas admitted himself that his business ran on violence. He didn't just have rivals eliminated, he orchestrated the murders personally when he felt he needed to. His network stretched from Harlem to Vietnam, with corrupt officials in Asia greasing the wheels to make sure the dope made it back home. And back on 116th Street, his main base, the business was guarded by his 5 younger brothers, the Country Boys. They were his enforcers, his lieutenants, and his protection, running Harlem like their personal kingdom. Prosecutors later made one of the harshest arguments ever put in a courtroom. They said Frank Lucas had killed more black people than the Ku Klux Klan, not with a gun, but with heroin. The audacious leader of the New York Boys wasn't just a drug dealer in Boston. He brought a new, ruthless level of organized, New York-style drug dealing and its associated violence to Boston's Roxbury community during the 1980s crack epidemic. Whiting's rise was brash, flashy, and fearless. From the Orchard Park projects, Whiting established a 24/7 crack distribution network. You could find dealers on shift like workers at a factory, hundreds of them, rotating in and out to keep the operation moving day and night. At its height, that machine was generating anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000 a day. For a Boston neighborhood already hit hard by poverty, that kind of money and the chaos it attracted turned Orchard Park into both a gold mine and a war zone. Whiting's grip on the streets was secured with violence. He was tied to at least 3 to 5 murders. But what made Whiting even more complex was his double life. To some in the community, he was God, a man who might help you pay your rent, drop off food, or sponsor a neighborhood event. That made him look like a benefactor, someone giving back. But the same man funding block parties was flooding those same blocks with poison.
He's actually the antithesis of God. He's the opposite of what God represents to, most, that name represents to most human beings in the world. He's a murderer. He's a crime lord. He's a ruthless dictator.
For a while, Whiting operated with impunity. He was too rich, too connected, and too feared to touch. But eventually, the feds built their case. And when they came for him, they made sure it stuck. Darryl God Whiting got life in prison, a sentence that still stands today. He wasn't just a Queens drug kingpin, he was a figure of unparalleled audacity whose actions represented a complete breakdown of respect for legitimate authority during the height of the crack epidemic. Leading his crack network, the Bebos, he built profits of up to $200,000 a month and forged connections with other powerful Queens outfits. But what set him apart was the way he treated authority with contempt. In 1988, still behind bars, Mason orchestrated one of the most shocking murders in New York history, the assassination of rookie NYPD officer Edward Byrne. Byrne, just 22 years old, was sitting in a patrol car, guarding the home of a witness in a drug case. In the middle of the night, 4 of Mason's men, Philip Copeland, Todd Scott, Scott Cobb, and Lorenzo Young, walked up to Byrne's car and executed him, shooting him 5 times in the head.
Queens grand jury is going to convene tomorrow to consider the case against 4 young men accused of executing rookie cop Edward Byrne. He was gunned down while guarding a witness in a drug case.
It wasn't about revenge on Byrne himself. It was about sending a message. The streets belong to us, not the cops. That murder shook the entire city, and it forced the government to crack down harder than ever before, putting a spotlight on Mason and the networks he worked with, including his ties to Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols. The 4 shooters were quickly caught, and their videotaped confessions tied it all back to Pappy. That sealed his fate. Mason was convicted.